Welcome to this Founding Fathers Weekend edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here every week at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And so you can go into your Father's Day barbecue better armed with the facts when you start to hear the rhetoric from people who only seem to be tapping in to cable news. Joining us first up here from American Commitment, Phil Kerpen is on the line with us. And Phil, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Happy Father's Day weekend. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing great. Same to you.
One of our most notable dads, and I say that only because his son's laptop has become, a cause celeb, and finally starting to bubble up into the mainstream media, is President Biden, who during his overseas trip has, really befuddled a lot of folks, but also showed again that he would rather be left alone to be president and not need to deal with the press badgering him on things. He's given a couple of come on mans and things like that to questions the press has asked. Is he going to come back from this trip, with a little tarnish on the armor regarding how the press views his presidency?
I'd like to hope the answer is yes, but, I think that just being not Donald Trump is enough to have their, undying affection, and they'll continue to slant everything as positively as possible towards this administration. The question, I think, the better question, I think, is whether the American public is starting to perceive the president less favorably, and we're not really seeing that in the polls yet, but you have to think that the more they see kind of the public inability to explain things and answer questions, the more that may be reflected in people's confidence in him.
Well, when you look at, and I was asked this by no less an authority than my own wife, she said, how in the world could 80 million people vote for this person? I said, it's conceivable to me after 4 years of unending negative press that 80 million people just wanted to vote against the other guy. And we could have put Pol Pot up there. And as long as it wasn't Donald Trump, he probably was going to get sufficient number of votes to win the Electoral College, Phil. And I think that this really at a turning point for media in general, not necessarily yours nor mine out of aside from association, is really losing grip on its audience. We see the numbers plummeting on cable news and the readerships of the legacy mastheads start to diminish as well. And people started to turn around saying, hold it, this turned out to be true after all. Even the social media platforms are getting a black eye as more and more of the things that they banned people for are turning out to be true and not conspiracy theories.
Right. I saw a cartoon the other day, like a fake headline thing that said, critical shortage of conspiracy theories in the United States as all of them are proven true. And it's interesting because, we have, it's amazing how rapidly something can go from outrageously so false that it has to be suppressed and blocked and censored to kind of conventional wisdom. And I think, it's pretty widely believed now that the coronavirus came from the Wuhan laboratory in one way or another. And yet, if you said that, a month or two ago, you were probably getting your accounts banned.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said a couple of, maybe a month ago, it was an amazing world where just accounting for all the votes being cast in an election is a conspiracy theory, but UFOs are the lead story on 60 Minutes. So,
right.
The world, but little by little, Fulton County's judges are now investigating Arizona's case there, and I don't know if it turns around and helps Donald Trump in 4 years or even the Republican Party in 2 years, and it's really not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in people being able to find jobs and be able to get back to work and find those things. We watch the government continue to get oppressive on the gig economy and try to regulate that, which seemed to be about the only thing that saved us during the coronavirus lockdowns, Phil. But let's start in one of the most horrific job-killing things. So there's the president hanging out with all these global warming advocates. There was Prince Charles and the French, the Germans, all talking about climate change in abstract and the economic benefits of climate change legislations. And the press just goes, yeah, with no critical inquiry as to where are those jobs and what are those jobs going to be doing.
Well, look, we're in a bad place right now on energy policy. We went from being energy independent under President Trump to once again being major importers very rapidly, and we've just got all of these ingredients that are pushing prices up at the same time. We've got a weakening dollar, we've got rising demand, we've got production limitations through all the lease cancellations and regulations that Biden has brought in. We've got transportation bottlenecks, both at the crude level where they're killing pipelines and at the retail level where we have, among other labor shortages the country has right now, we have a shortage of tanker truck drivers because that's one of the professions where people are saying, hey, I can make more money with the unemployment bonuses not working than the very tough job of driving a tanker truck. And so we've got the bottlenecks at retail delivery as well. So you put all of these things together, and, we just had gasoline prices go up 56% over the past 12 months, the biggest increase since Jimmy Carter was president in 1980. Mm-hmm. And, the Biden administration and sort of the G7 conventional wisdom global warming response to that is, oh, good, it's a good start. Let's push it up even higher. Let's make it so people can't afford to fill up the gas tank more than once in a while and can't afford to drive their cars and can't afford to heat their homes because then they'll use less energy, and our computer models say that'll prevent a global warming impact, 100 or 200 or 300 years from now.
Right.
So that's the mentality these people have.
Phil Kerpen is on with us from American Commitment. Find out more at American Commitment. And Phil, one of the things that fascinates me about the abdication is here we stand aside and let the Russian government push a pipeline through into Germany. Germany sends a big deal with them. Russia has already shown that they'll use their gas pipelines instead of tanks like they used to enforce their will on these satellite countries. Now it's almost like a gas curtain instead of an iron curtain. What sort of abdication of world leadership is it to shut down our pipelines? I noticed this past week they finally said the pipeline that the president wouldn't let cross the border finally said, well, then that's it. We're not even going to make it anymore. We're not even going to try. And yet here's Russia just laying pipe all over the place.
It's a pretty remarkable contrast that the same administration that destroyed the Keystone XL pipeline, that killed it by revoking the presidential permit, also repealed the sanctions that allowed Russia to move ahead with Nord Stream 2. And I think that it shows that it's not as simple as saying this administration is against fossil fuels and is against oil and gas. They're against American oil and gas, but they seem to be okay with oil and gas and coal in other places. Part of what's so ridiculous about the whole Democratic energy push for the last couple of decades has been that they want us to suffer higher energy prices, but they can't be very serious about trying to stop global emissions and stop global warming because they keep signing agreements that are very tough on the U.S. and completely exempt countries like China and India, and now we're letting Russia build a pipeline. And so you can only conclude that it's some sort of almost masochistic belief that imposing suffering on ourselves is somehow virtuous, even when we allow others to have emissions that totally offset any reduction that we have here. So I don't know. It's not rational, but it's been going on for a long time, and it's similar to China building hundreds of coal plants while we shut all of ours down.
When you look at the idea out of this $1.6 trillion Donnybrook of everyone is each other's infrastructure bill, and even the, quote, pared down $900 billion, quote, bipartisan Senate bill, this idea that all this infrastructure is the government's responsibility in the first place to build, certainly roads, are part of it. You could make a case that maybe the rails, instead of owning the trains and not the rails, is reversed. You could make a case about that. But does this feed into the green energy where we'll build the infrastructure for your solar panels, we'll build the infrastructure for your high-speed internet, so you really don't have to leave your house ever again, kind of thing, Phil?
Well, somebody's going to leave the house to build it, and I think a lot of what we've seen over the past year has been this sort of this sort of assumption of virtue on behalf of rich liberals, that they're doing some wonderful thing by staying in their homes all the time and being catered to by the people who are out working. And I hope that mentality ends with the pandemic ending. But maybe we will see sort of a continuation of the government's going to take care of you to sit at home and everything's going to be fine. I mean, look, the fact that the unemployment bonuses are still continuing after the pandemic is a very bad sign, and they're continuing in 25 states. Basically, every Republican state except Vermont and Massachusetts is ending the unemployment bonuses. Every single Democratic state is keeping them, which means there is, I think, something to this idea that the Democratic philosophy now is, sit at home and we'll send you money and we'll take care of everything. The problem, of course, is how do you take care of it? How do you even do the liberal things they want to do and go build them solar panels and that kind of? But how do you find the workers to do those things if you've decided everyone's going to make more not working than working? And so we've got this acute labor shortage with 9.3 million job openings. And I wonder if the Democrats have thought through the implication of that for all the, for infrastructure. I mean, how they want to have these massive government jobs programs and put all these people on the government payroll, but how are they going to find people willing to do those jobs if they're paying them not to work at the same time?
Well, we could just go down to the border and, pick up some folks who've walked all the way from Guatemala, Phil, or ridden a bus and then got out and walked the last quarter of a mile from Guatemala. And in some circles, that seems to be the feeling, is that we're trying to break the American workforce's interest in earning more money, while out of one face saying we want $15 an hour minimum wage, standards. But they seem to be opening the border up to all these folks who are going to be working for far less than that, unless you get something like an E-Verify or something going on.
Yeah, it's a good point. Look, I think that, we probably do need more immigration to address the labor shortage, because only part of it is these Democratic policies of paying people not to work. Part of it is the demographics, which we already knew we were going to be dealing with, with the baby boomers reaching retirement and a lot of prime-age males who should be in the workforce sitting at home playing video games and being taken care of by their parents. So this was already a trend. It was made much, much worse, obviously, by these policies. But, if the labor shortage continues and there are help wanted signs everywhere, then we probably do need to look at ways to increase immigration. But I think that, it's absolutely critical that you do it through a legal process, and you have people who are going to, learn English and assimilate and pay taxes and contribute, and that you don't just have lax border enforcement and sort of have, allow the economic pressure to sort of overwhelm kind of an orderly system. So I don't have a problem necessarily with increasing immigration. I think it's something we probably need to do if the labor shortage continues the way it is, but we've got to do it through an orderly process, and we really don't have that right now.
We're visiting with Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment, on this Father's Day weekend edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. This one made a lot of people scratch their heads during President Biden's trip overseas, and he took time out to bash Republicans. The
Republican Party is vastly diminished in numbers. The leadership of the Republican Party is fractured, and the Trump wing of the party is the bulk of the party, but it makes up a significant minority of the American people.
Is to paraphrase, is President Trump living rent-free in Joe Biden's head, or is this all about calculus leading into the 2022 midterms? And he's got to take every opportunity in a very puzzling place to take a crack at Republicans from the stage in Europe?
Well, look, I think that the Democrats are, and the media to a certain extent, are still totally obsessed with President Trump, and they would love to have a 2022 election be about him. It's not possible. The American people don't vote that way. They don't think that way. And so I think it's a very poor strategy, but I do think it's their strategy. I don't think it's just Biden going off on some tangent. I think they think that congratulating themselves on not being President Trump is sufficient to hold the House and hold the Senate. I tend to think that doesn't work. The American people are forward-looking, not backward-looking.
Lost in all this, and I've said this in my own analysis, is broadband is the new health care. It's the new political bumper sticker. It's not as hard to sell as health care was. You didn't have as many of these ornery doctors raising their hand and saying that's not how it works. When Obamacare was rolled out, most of the broadband distributors are like, "You're going to build it for me? Oh, that's great. We'll just we'll let you have the wire, and you build it, and we'll just run it down the driveway to the house." Is this, though, going to set up a place where, again, we're watching consumer prices going up 6% in the past couple of weeks, and inflation has already started to show up in grocery stores and in retail stores, more spending on something that isn't necessarily a government function and could be addressed with deregulation and actually taking some of the burden away from the broadband providers and helping them get it and at least get out of the way in getting it into the rural communities?
Well, we've had so many of these programs that supposedly we're going to build out rural broadband, and we've just shoveled, more and more money. And, we've got there's the $350 billion to states and localities from the last stimulus bill. One of the preferred uses is broadband, and yet they want to do yet another round of it in this infrastructure bill. And the problem we have every time every time this broadband spending comes out is, the areas that are unserved by broadband are the very remote rural areas, and there are not that many of them left in this country. But there are some, and just it's not really commercially viable to build out to them, and that's why they haven't had the availability of broadband in those areas. And but the way these programs are always written, the money doesn't go to those areas because no company that can get the grant to get the money can make a business work out there, even with the government subsidies. So what happens is they end up overbuilding the suburbs for the fifth time, or they end up building out in an urban area yet again, or the money goes to a government-run system to compete with private systems in areas that already have broadband, and you end up with all of these boondoggles that essentially waste the money building redundant services to places that are already served. Because that's where, and often very unfairly, that you now have a subsidized competitor competing with the ones that spent their own money. And so we've had this recurring problem over and over and over again. And if you really want this to work, if you really want to build out to the areas that don't have service, you need to have ironclad, airtight language that says the funds can only be spent in areas that are not currently served. And you need to have a meaningful definition of broadband, something like the FCC definition of 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up, because the U.S. Treasury right now, on the money that was spent in the stimulus bill, they want the definition of unserved to be based on 100 megabits up and down symmetrical. Well, that makes half the country unserved. And if you use a definition like that, where do you think the companies that get the grants are going to build?
Oh, yeah.
They're going to build in a place where they can compete with someone who doesn't have subsidies and beat them for a whole lot of customers. And so these programs end up not accomplishing the goal that they claim that they're trying to accomplish, which is reaching the unserved. Instead, they just compete with areas that already have service, and they do it over and over again, and we spend a fortune over and over again. And it's ridiculous, but it's typical of the way government spending programs go.
Phil, last one for you. Margaret Thatcher once said that one of her great disappointments was not being able to privatize the British healthcare system, amongst all the things she was able to privatize. And I've talked to many listeners and friends who are ardent anti-Obamacare advocates, knew all the information, who have, after COVID-19, shrugged and said, yeah, I give. government's got to do this. Private sector fails. They've been convinced that COVID's, death rate, though I think actually 1/3 of what they initially told us it was going to be in their modeling was closer to 2 million Americans, not 600,000, though each one is a tragedy. I feel compelled to, warranty that statement, that the American people have lost their zeal to push back against single-payer health care. Is this, have enough of our soldiers abandoned the battlefield in this, Phil?
I really hope not, and I think that would be taking totally the wrong lesson from what we've seen over the past year. We didn't have the greatest healthcare performance imaginable, but we did better than most places, and we certainly did better overall than a place like the United Kingdom with a totally government-run system. And I think one of the things you're going to see over the next few years is the backlog of canceled procedures and screenings and so forth is going to lead to a lot of worse, more severe cancer patients being caught later, and there's just going to be a huge amount of healthcare services that are going to have to be provided to kind of dig us out of a hole. And I think what you're going to see is the U.S. is going to dig out of that hole in a year or two, and the U.K. is going to take more like 10 or 15 years. And there are a lot of people are going to die on waiting lists to get back in to see someone because of all the things that were canceled over the last year. And I think that it's going to be pretty clear that our system overall is much better than a government-run system in terms of the capacity to deal with kind of pent-up demand for healthcare services. And I also think you got to look at the incentives for innovation, and there's a reason that it was really U.S. companies that drove all of the vaccine development, the development of the monoclonal antibodies and the other treatments. Even when companies in other countries were developing these things, they were developing them with an eye to the U.S. market, because that's where you've been able to get a return to justify the R&D costs and the billions that it takes. Other countries almost all have price controls and government-run systems, and if and it is unfair that they largely get a free ride on us. But if we go down the path of a government-run, price-controlled system, there won't be any moving vehicle for anyone to get a ride on, free or otherwise, and medical innovation will slow dramatically. And so I think that we're going to have to keep fighting on that. There's no question that they want to move in that direction, and they have already moved in that direction with the expansion of Obamacare subsidies in the COVID bill. But I think that we've got a really strong case to make that that's the exact wrong lesson to learn. And then one of the things I'm going to be watching over the next couple of years is the ability of countries to clear the massive backlog of procedures that were canceled and postponed. And I think we're going to do a lot better than the countries with government-run systems.
Well, Phil, you know that I'll still be standing my post with you for that end. And American Commitment read is great piece on this, by the way, that Phil penned at American Spectator online at spectator.org. It's called A Post-COVID Call to Stop Biden's Bankrupt Agenda. Phil, thank you so much for joining us this weekend on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
All right, have a good one.
And joining us next from the Family Foundation of Virginia, Victoria Cobb, and their request to find out what's going on in one of our Virginia schools' curriculums on Freedom and Prosperity next.